So I know some of you have had assignments asking you to write an article in the style of a piece for The Conversation. So in this video, I'm going to look a little bit about how you might approach that kind of assignment or something similar if you were asked to write for a different science journal or something. Sorry, a different kind of popular science magazine. So rather than tell you, exactly what you need to do to write for The Conversation, I'm going to look at some skills that help you, whatever it is you're asked to write about, to understand the style and the language and the kind of things that are used in that type of writing, so that you can apply it to lots of different contexts. If you were asked to write an article in the style of The New Scientist, or asked to write a departmental research blog. These skills are really important, being able to communicate scientific or engineering research to a broad audience and to the general public, as well as to other specialists, is a really important skill. If you think about it, you could have found the most exciting research in the world, but if you can't communicate it to others, both others in the field and also the wider world, it's unlikely to get very far. So these communication skills are really important. So how can we go about it? The first thing to think about, which might sound really obvious, is the content and in terms of the purpose and the audience. So what is the conversation, or whichever other place you're writing for? What is the purpose of that journal? And who are they writing for? Now, in terms of the conversation, they give us quite a good clue. Their strapline is academic rigour and journalistic flair. So in terms of academic rigour, although you might be writing something that's for the wider population, it can't be unsupported sounding off or ideas speaking from your own head. It has to be supported, it has to be academic, it has to have kind of specific, precise, new, bringing us up to date with knowledge in a particular field, and to be supported, substantiated by good quality research and evidence. The journalistic flair, it needs to be enjoyable to read and accessible to a wide range of people. So the conversation makes it really easy in having that little strapline to know what we're heading for. But other sources as well, they usually have maybe something, maybe even explaining guidance for people who want to write for them. So it's worth looking. Again, for example, on The Conversation, they actually have a segment where they explain who their audience is. So it's worth reading that kind of thing, because to be able to write effectively for a particular audience, you need to know why you're writing and who you're writing for. This then takes us to, so what actually is the content? And again, I would suggest reading a number of the articles from The Conversation, because there's a variety. There are different types of articles, and it might be for the assignment you've been asked to do a specific type. But if we think, we've said it's going to be academic rigour, so it might well be talking about a piece of research or several pieces of research. Now imagine the different contexts we can talk about research. For example, an academic research paper. We have quite expected content and quite expected format to that. You have your abstract, you have your introduction saying the context, the real world need, the gap, and what the aims are. You then have your method, you have your results, you have a conclusion. Depending on the exact type of research, you know what you're expecting to find in an academic paper. How about if it was a internal university publication that's going out to members of the university and maybe people who've graduated from the university, but that's telling them about the research? If you look at that kind of writing, it's still talking about the research, but the content is quite different. In that sort of paper, it focuses very much on the person who did the research and the university, and then what they found, but there's more of the talk about the person, which in the academic paper is largely missing. So what is the content in The Conversation? Again, I would say look at a variety of them, but I think what you can often see is really starting with that sense of what is the need, what is the need for this research, what's the context, what's the interest in it, and then leading into an explanation of the research, though it would be done differently from in an academic paper. So, well, we've got there that it's academic rigour with the conversation. We're going to need to refer to other academic work and reference in some way, but how does the conversation do this? In academic work, we use other sources to discuss academic research and references to support our ideas. We then use a reference system which is often prescribed, maybe Harvard or Chicago or one of the others. The conversation also uses references to support statements that are being made and to link out to pieces of research that are being discussed. However, they don't use those academic referencing systems. Instead, they add hyperlinks over the particular word or phrase that they then are supporting, or maybe when they refer to the research. You also notice that whereas in academic papers, we normally refer to people by their surname, and if we want to talk about them directly, that's not necessarily the case in the conversation, and they might use phrases, some people, some researchers suggest, our latest research, that in an academic paper might sound informal or quite vague, but in this different context, this academic rigour but journalistic flair, they might use that language a little bit more, as well as the hyperlinks. Paragraphs are really interesting to look at how they change across different types of writing. So the typical formal academic paragraph is highly structured. It has the topic sentence which holds the paragraph together and gives it the focus, and that idea is then developed in the rest of the paragraph by supporting sentences. Have a look at the conversation articles and consider, do they have paragraphs that are structured in that way? And how long are the paragraphs? Paragraph length, is affected by what we're writing for. If you compare an academic journal to a BBC News article to the conversation, you'll find paragraphs of very different lengths. Often the academic paper has the longest paragraphs. The BBC News articles will be the shortest, could well just be one sentence at times, and the conversation is kind of that middle ground between the two. Then obviously something we want to look at is the language. I mean, they've kind of made a point of that with the conversation, the journalistic flair, and also the different audience being for the general public. So what does the language tell us that we look at? And it's interesting here to think about both vocabulary and the sentence structure. So I've got just a couple of examples here, but I would really suggest that you looked at a number of articles and got a feel for them, because different people also have slightly different styles within there, and so you want to really develop a voice that you're comfortable with within the overall feel of the journal. So first of all, but if we can address these issues, we can use satellite images to obtain crucial information. So already in that first sentence, we can see a style that uses a lot more personal language and slightly more informal. So in many areas of academic writing, not all of them, but in many, but wouldn't be used to start a sentence. However would be used to start a sentence, but would be used in the middle of the sentence. This is less formal, so they've used the but, and that's absolutely fine. Then we've got two we's, we can address these issues, we can use satellite images. Then if we look at the next sentence, for instance, satellites can detect changes such as forest growing, shrinking or thinning earlier than might be apparent from the ground. So here the use of the dash is also interesting. We'd rarely use that in academic writing. The dash can be used in the place of commas, but it is a little bit less formal. So great for using here, like in the conversation, but we wouldn't typically see it so much in an academic paper. Then if we look at the second example, it looks like spring, but it doesn't feel anything like it. So again, we've got some contractions. The shortened language doesn't rather than does not. You wouldn't get that in academic writing, but it's appropriate for this journalistic flair. It's absolutely fine. Anything, again, we wouldn't normally have that in academic writing because it'd be considered too broad, too vague, too unfocused. But this is the opening of an article for the conversation with that journalistic flair that's kind of writing with a bit more freedom and a bit more colour and variety than we usually do in academic writing. And again, we've got the contraction. It's hard to believe. It feels so cold. Just the way that written, it feels very much like it's a conversation, like a chat. It won't come as a surprise. That sort of phrase, where they've stayed stubbornly in single digits. I mean, stubbornly, that's kind of implying that the temperatures in certain regions have a behaviour and have a temperament stubborn. So this again is lovely journalistic flair. You wouldn't find it in academic paper, but it's the way we're equally, the normal academic paper writing would sound very dry if it was used for a conversation article. So just a summary, these skills that you can use whenever you're trying to write for a different context. First of all, most importantly, think about the purpose. Why are you writing? Why is the publication being written, and who are they writing for? Because that will affect your choices and everything else. This will affect the content that you include, and also if and how you use other sources and reference them. It's worth thinking about paragraphs and observing how long are they. Typically they're shorter, on much shorter paragraphs when it's an online publication, primarily designed for online versus printed. But it's really important to check. And also the language, you can think about vocabulary and sentence structures. And in terms of vocabulary, think about the formality, the degree of specialism. So is this a highly technical word that only people in that specialist field would understand? Or is this maybe a scientific word, but that would be understood by most people in the population? Or is it an everyday language that's really not specialised at all? It can also be interesting to look at the number of syllables and the variety, how much this can vary across different types of writing. So number of syllables meaning the number of beats in a word. So when you've got these skills to be able to analyse other sources of writing, then it really gives you a lot of scope and a lot of personal choice in how you communicate in different contexts, which is a really important skill in engineering and science.